Have you ever thought about who the worst Death Eater really was? What if it wasn't the most sadistic or ruthless, but the most spineless? In today's video, you'll find out why Lucius Malfoy might be the most disgraceful servant of Voldemort. At first glance, Lucius Malfoy is the perfect aristocrat. Polished manners, expensive robes, an air of superiority. He's powerful, wealthy, and undeniably skilled in magic. Yet behind this flawless exterior lurks a man driven by fear, cowardice, and selfish ambition. Unlike Bellatrix Lestrange, who embraced Voldemort's ideology with fanatical devotion, Lucius never had the courage to fully commit. He talked big, played the part, but when real danger loomed, he scrambled to save himself. Time and time again he proved that his true allegiance was not to the Dark Lord, but to his own survival. How did he become this way? What happened to him after Voldemort's downfall? Let's take a closer look at Lucius Malfoy's path from privilege to disgrace. Born into one of the wealthiest pure-blood families, Lucius grew up believing in his own superiority. His father, Abraxas Malfoy, was rumoured to have been involved in political conspiracies, setting the stage for Lucius's obsession with power. At Hogwarts, he was an excellent student, a model Slytherin, and even became a prefect. But despite the popular assumption, he was never particularly close to Severus Snape. Snape was 6 years younger, and Lucius had little reason to associate with him. After school, Lucius eagerly joined Voldemort's ranks, drawn to the Dark Lord's power. He believed aligning himself with the strongest wizard of the age would secure his place in the magical world. Unlike other Death Eaters who openly reveled in cruelty, Lucius operated in the shadows. He used his wealth and influence to manipulate people rather than fight on the battlefield. Yet when Voldemort fell, Lucius didn't hesitate to switch sides. He claimed he had been under the Imperius curse, avoiding Azkaban and continuing his life of luxury. He married Narcissa Black, fathered Draco, and focused on expanding his political influence, bribing ministry officials rather than engaging in open warfare. This is where Lucius became even more despicable than the Death Eaters, who at least remained loyal. Bellatrix never wavered. Fenrir Greyback never hid his savagery. But Lucius? He played both sides, never willing to get his hands dirty unless he was sure he could escape the consequences. His obsession with power led him to meddle in Hogwarts affairs, targeting Dumbledore and pushing his own agenda. He secretly slipped Tom Riddle's diary to Ginny Weasley, setting off a chain of events that endangered the entire school. His plan failed, and when he was caught, he was disgracefully removed from Hogwarts' Board of Governors. When Voldemort returned, Lucius found himself trapped. He had spent years denying his involvement with the Dark Lord, yet now he had no choice but to serve him again. He was given a critical mission: retrieve the prophecy from the Department of Mysteries. He failed spectacularly. Captured and imprisoned in Azkaban, he lost everything: his wealth, his status, and most importantly, Voldemort's trust. When the Dark Lord freed his captured followers, Lucius returned home a broken man. His once magnificent manor became a Death Eater headquarters, and he was no longer a powerful leader, but a disgraced servant. Voldemort humiliated him at every turn, taking his wand, stripping him of his dignity and treating him like a worthless pawn. By the time of the Battle of Hogwarts, Lucius had no fight left in him. While others stood their ground, he abandoned the battlefield to search for Draco. His only act of defiance was fleeing, ensuring his family's survival while leaving Voldemort's forces to their doom. This final betrayal spared the Malfoys from Azkaban, but it did not redeem Lucius. Unlike Draco, who eventually grew beyond his family's toxic beliefs, Lucius never truly changed. He remained bitter, clinging to outdated ideas, even resenting the way his grandson was being raised with more tolerance. He lost his power, his influence, and, worst of all, his relevance. In the end, Lucius Malfoy wasn't the most dangerous Death Eater. He wasn't the cruelest, the strongest, or even the most committed. He was something far worse, a man who spent his entire life chasing power, only to be left with nothing. The war was over, but the echoes of its destruction lingered. The Dark Lord was gone, his forces scattered, his ideology shattered. And yet, for the pure-blood families who had built their lives around supremacy, the battle was far from finished. The world had changed, and they had to decide, adapt or disappear. For the Malfoys, the fall from grace was brutal. Once among the most powerful families in the wizarding world, they now found themselves in disgrace. Lucius, once the master of influence, was a broken man. Stripped of power, stripped of fearsome allies, he spent his days in quiet exile, watching a world that no longer bowed to his name. Draco, however, was different. He had seen the cost of his father's beliefs. The war had changed him. He did not fight for the victors, but he had seen what the losers had become. And he wanted no part of it. Other pure-blood families faced similar fates. The Carrows, once brutal enforcers of Voldemort's rule at Hogwarts, vanished into obscurity, their name a curse whispered among the new generation. The Lestranges had already fallen with Bellatrix, but what remained of their bloodline was either imprisoned or hiding. Even the proud Yaxleys, once embedded in the Ministry, found themselves hunted, their influence erased. The old order had crumbled, and those who had fought for it were paying the price. Not all pure-blood families had stood with Voldemort, but even those who had remained neutral felt the shift. The Greengrasses, a name untouched by scandal, quietly distanced themselves from the war. They were still purebloods, still wealthy, still connected, but they knew that times had changed. Astoria, raised with traditional values, would later go on to marry Draco Malfoy, but not because of blood status. She saw something else in him. A man who understood that survival now meant leaving behind the past. "Draco has changed," Harry had once told Ginny when their children first met. "He doesn't believe what his father did. That's why his son is different." And it was true. When Scorpius Malfoy was born, he was not raised to despise Muggle-borns. He was not taught that his blood made him superior. The Malfoys still carried their old pride, but the war had beaten the cruelty out of them. Lucius, bitter and resentful, tried to pass his beliefs down to his grandson. But Draco and Astoria refused. Yet, not all pure-blood families abandoned their past. Some clung to it with desperation, unwilling to accept defeat. Deep in the shadows, whispers of a hidden movement stirred. The belief in blood purity was not gone, only silenced. Families like the Knot clan, once staunch supporters of Voldemort, continued their traditions behind closed doors. Theodore Knot, clever and cautious, never openly defied the new order, but he never renounced the old ways either. The wizarding world moved on, but scars remained. Hogwarts, once a battleground for these ideals, became a symbol of the new era. Muggleborns were no longer seen as outsiders. They were prefects, professors, even auras. Kingsley Shacklebolt, as Minister of Magic, ensured that blood purity was no longer a path to power. Laws changed, attitudes shifted, and yet prejudice does not die easily. "We've made progress," Hermione Granger Weasley once said in an interview. "But we're not done, not yet." For the first time in centuries, pure-blood families were no longer the rulers of the wizarding world. Some accepted it, some resented it, and some plotted in silence. But one thing was clear: history had turned against them, and it would not turn back.